Good morning, colleagues all over Nigeria and beyond. I've seen a couple of names that are not Nigerians. My name is Omolara Balogun. I work here at the West Africa Civil Society Institute as the country lead for Waxy Node in Nigeria. And it's a huge pleasure to welcome you to this conversation today, where we'll be talking about navigating U.S. government aid freeze, civil society's resilience, and the future of Nigeria. To start, I think I'm so used to having to moderate bilingual events. I was almost going to say, to share how the interpretation icon works. So please pardon me. Let me welcome our colleagues who are joining us from all over the world, all over Nigeria, to this great event. We would be delving into how this new decision of the United States is impacting the work that we do as civil society. On the 20th of January, about a month ago, the government of the United States announced a 90-day suspension of all foreign development assistance. And the excuse was for them to reevaluate how its effectiveness and alignment with its foreign policy objectives. Whilst the impact of this decision is still very much unfolding within the development space globally, it is obvious that this singular decision has shaken the development sector almost to its roots. Nigeria is one of the countries that have been receiving aid from the United States for a very long time. From the records that we have, in U.S. aid allocated about $820 million to support critical sector ranging from healthcare, education, agri security, humanitarian relief, et cetera, to support Nigeria as a state. And we have also seen a huge support from our United States to strengthening democracy, governance, and civil society sector, specifically in Nigeria. In 2014 alone, U.S. government invested approximately $100 million to support democracy and peace building effort in Nigeria, especially in the northern parts of Nigeria, where we have been expressing violent extremism and terrorist activities. On our part as civil society, considering the work that we do and the role we play in driving development efforts in Nigeria, we have been heavily affected as a sector. And these further compound the different threats that we have been facing as a sector, including in the ecosystem, the civic space generally, the work that we do. And it's also happening at a time where there has been a lot of aid cuts, shrinking donor funding, which we have been battling with for a couple of years now, civil society sustainability conversation, alternative resource mobilization conversation. All of this is happening, at the same time. There's been a lot of disruption, not only to our work, to the lives of the communities that we serve, that we represent, to our teams within our various organizations. I've heard story of people being put on automatic unpaid leave, administrative leave, as they call it. Some have had to slash the salaries of their staff. Others, there are so many uncertainties out there, and some of the sector leaders are quite struggling on what post 90 days freeze means for their respective organization. So it's really a defining moment, not only for Nigeria civil society sector, but for development actors, development ecosystem, broadly, globally. Yesterday at Waxy, we had a similar conversation looking at from a regional perspective, and I'm glad that one of our colleagues will be sharing some nuggets from that conversation with us. So today's conversation is really about finding, about having the platform to vent on how this decision has affected or impacted the work that we do, and then sharing ideas on what the alternatives are from the short to medium to long-term, alternatives, and how we can further strengthen collaboration between and among ourselves within the sectors, and of course, forge a more sustainable path for the sector which we owed, so dearly. So I would not say much. I would take the next few minutes to introduce our colleagues who will be speaking pretty much, in detail to this conversation. The first on my list, in no particular order, is Oyebisi Babatunde Oliseye. Oyebisi is the Executive Director of Nigerian Network of NGOs, a prominent body representing over 3,000 civil society organizations across Nigeria. NGO advocates for effective policies on poverty and development issues. Before Oyebisi joined the Triple NGO, he served as the global coordinator for UNICEF Rural Voices of Youth, an initiative empowering young people in rural area. He has served on the board of International Center for Nonprofit Law as an international steering committee member of the civil society pillar. Is a community of democracy. His work focused on strengthening civil society and enabling environment across West Africa. Oyebisi, thank you for joining us. The next speaker I have here is Mr. John Onyeku. John is an accomplished legal and policy expert with multidisciplinary advanced degree. He's the recipient of several prestigious academic and professional awards, including the Erasmus Mundus Master's Program in Public Policy, the Open Society International Policy Fellowship, and the UAC Nigeria Higher Education Scholarship. He has over 25 years of experience, and he had served as the Deputy Chief of Party on 4 large-scale fast-paced USAID programs across Nigeria. He is a published author, a director, and a visiting scholar at the Atlanta Graduate School, and currently serves as a senior counsel at Apex Legal Barristers and Solicitors. John, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Also in our midst today is Chioma Awuegbo. Chioma works at the intersection of women's issues and media, politics, and technology. She is the executive director of Tech RNG, and she also served on the board of Waxinode Nigeria. It's important for me to add that. In Tech RNG, she focuses on making technology accessible to women and utilizing tech solutions to address societal problems that impact women. Her organization co-pilots a GBV emergency response fund in partnership with the Education as Vaccine, providing a rapid funding to survivors of sexual and gender-based violence within a 24-hour window. Chioma advocates for people power, fully cognizant of the transformative potential of citizens using their voices for change. She has played pivotal roles in movements such as Light Up Nigeria, Enough is Enough, Gen Voices, Occupy Nigeria, Bring Back Our Girls, Not Too Young to Run. Chioma is an advocate, and she convened the state of emergency GBV in June 2020 to address the escalated sexual and gender-based violence during the COVID lockdown. Chioma, thank you so much for joining the conversation. The last but not the least of our speakers today is John Frinjoa. John is my colleague at the regional office. He is the program officer responsible for policy influencing and advocacy at the West Africa Civil Society Institute. His expertise intersects civil society, international development, democracy and governance, conflict, crisis, and security. John has extensive experience working with civil society and international development organizations in Ghana, West Africa, and in the United States. He has supported many research programs and provided technical assistance on various themes around public policy, governance, and development. John is dedicated to empowering civil society to become resilient and responsive to the dynamics of civic space development and governance challenges facing the region. John is a World Bank IFC certified trainer with over 10 years of experience in research, advocacy, and program management. Thank you, John, for joining us for this conversation. Thank you so much. I think we can get right into it, and I would like to start with John. Now we have two Johns. Okay, so John Owoeko Onyeko, please pardon me in case I didn't pronounce that rightly. My apologies. John, you are very familiar with the USAID program. You have been a deputy chief of party of this institution in Nigeria. What were the focus not only for USAID in Nigeria, but we would like you to speak to, the people, the demography that USAID has been funding and the population that are likely to be most affected by this sudden decision of the United States government. John, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity to join this meeting and to share thoughts on what's happening. If you look at if you talked about the focus of what USAID is doing, they have historically focused on health, education, economic development, and governance, and been instrumental in funding most of what we, when I say we, I say most of us take for granted in Nigeria, be it in a lot of funding came into HIV/AIDS, the Presidential Emergency Plan for HIV/AIDS. That was USAID, the PEPFAR activity, the malaria rollback malaria activities. Basically, USAID again trying to ensure that there is adequate support for this. And as a matter of fact, they are paying doctors. Sometimes doctors are not able to go to some far-end places to work for many reasons. Many of us know some very rural areas. They pay them some allowance to be able, so that people are able to get resources, health resources in those locations. Aside from that, they're also working with, that basically affects women, children, youth, persons with disabilities, and a lot of work that they are also doing in the realms of governance and human rights in Nigeria, elections. Many of us know the work that TMG and other CSO organizations have done and continue to do in the electoral space. USAID have significant funding that they have deployed to support that process. And of course, there is also the issues around agriculture. Most of what they do has every part, basically. So there is no one demography or one sector that has benefit that you will say they have not touched in Nigeria. So they have worked across sectors. They have provided resources to support people to do a lot of policy and advocacies across those sectors. And they have also provided direct service delivery to ensure that those sectors get the right services. And of course, the big one about is, you say, responsible for what's happened in the Northeast, the humanitarian tickets. I mean, that's another one that they have done and continue to do very well. A lot of funding to alleviate the sufferings of the very worst situation that we have in the Northeast, especially, and recently also across the Northwest. So you say it seems to be in every sector in Nigeria, and they have touched every institution, be it in government at the federal level. I'm aware that the Nigerian Governors Forum has benefited from its support. I'm aware that the legislature's forum has also benefited from that support. I'm sure more than half of the CSO practitioners in this platform would have directly benefited or indirectly benefited from their support, either for capacity building and for them to be able to advocate on an issue that is there to the realization of their mandate. So every demography suffers, every institution suffers because of this. And I'm happy that the government of Nigeria is trying to say, okay, we will be able to take some, or meet up some of the gaps, but it will be difficult for them to do that. The EU has recently come to say, we can't meet those gaps because you said funds more than 40% of brings in more than 40% of aid resources that's coming to Nigeria year in, year out. So they are a very big player, and this is going to go a long way in there's a lot of gap, but I'm sure as we progress, we'll dig deeper into some of those gaps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I mean, it's overwhelming to cope with all that you have shared. I mean, we understand that US funds a lot, but these are critical sector: health, education, agriculture, talking about food security, and then security itself, governance. This is huge. I want to go to Chima. Chima, I mean, you are within the sector. You've probably been a recipient yourself. To what extent can you say this suspension affects the work that you do at TechR, especially looking at it from a gender perspective, your partnerships, the constituency that you serve directly? How has that constituency been affected? Can you speak to that for 3 minutes, please?
Right. Thank you very much. And good morning to everyone. Thank you so much for joining the call today. I'll speak from a broad gender perspective. As we know, the current president of the United States is one who seems to have certain thoughts about gendered conversations, and we've seen this in some of his proclamations around, diversity, equity, inclusion. We've seen this around conversations, especially as it concerns the queer community. And unfortunately, these proclamations come at a time when there has been an intentional pushback against, women's rights, feminism, inclusion of women, etc. And so the first sentence on this, to answer your question, is it couldn't have come at a worse time. It couldn't have come at a time where more support is needed. We've seen governments across the continent and even beyond the continent trying to roll back policies and forward movements that the women's rights movement has made, or have made in the last 20 to 30 years. Gambia is an example with trying to roll back FGM, Uganda, Kenya. We're seeing human rights abuses on a scale that we haven't seen before. Nigeria is seeing human rights abuses, and this is coming from, whether it's government or it's big business or it's corporate organizations. This is literally the worst time to pull this type of funding. And I think one of the conversations that we've had in some of our private spaces is there's a lot of talk from people about, Nigeria needs to grow up, Africa needs to grow up, Africa needs to fund itself. But I mean, just listening to Mr. John talk about the deficit, you don't fund a more than 40% deficit in one day. So how does this affect us? The first thing that affects us, that affects women, that affects young girls, etc., is not even the money. And it's important to mention that it's not the money, it's the misinformation that has arisen from this. Across the continent, we're starting to see conversations like, if America is pushing back on LGBTQI plus rights, who are we? America is coming to its senses. America is realizing that there are just two genders and all of those types of things. This immediately presents a new layer of violence for minority groups, for persons with disabilities who are also queer. There's a new layer of risk. There's a new layer of vulnerability. The second thing is the misinformation around civil society and their function in society, and their function in countries, in states, etc. Across social media over the past 3 to 6 months, we've seen all sorts of really harmful narratives. Everything from, USAID funded Boko Haram, civil society are terrorist sympathizers. This happened, and that's why the 2015 elections and the 2019 elections. And there's so much going around with at such an alarming rate. Civil society are becoming an endangered species because for some reason, citizens who unfortunately do not know better are playing into the hands of politicians and therefore believing that everything that's wrong with the country is civil society, when the exact reverse is the case, and civil society organizations are actually plugging gaps that exist because of the failure of government. As far as our programs are concerned, yes, you're absolutely right. TechHer is a grantee of a program funded by the US government. And so, we've been affected by that pause. And I think one of the things that we're starting to see, and Americans are starting to tell their stories, is the the inhumanity of the immediacy of the suspension. It wasn't phased. It wasn't, it's just you wake up one morning and you don't have a job. I know some people, one person works in one US funded project, another person works in another US funded project, and both of them wake up on a Friday morning and they're out of jobs from two separate places. Again, I speak about vulnerability. It's the added vulnerability for people working across several projects, people working in hard to reach areas. It's the vulnerability of women and children who were receiving cash transfers in the Northeast, in the Northwest, in the North Central. And it's also the uncertainty. There's already a lot of uncertainty, especially in Nigeria, with a government that is not very receptive to civil society. And now you have the added layer of not having funding to run your programs or deliver to the extent that you normally would deliver. So I would say it is a trying time, and it's one of the reasons why I'm really excited that WAXI has organized this meeting so that people can speak their minds. And just as you said in the opening, we can think about ways to forge ahead, even in this time of extreme turbulence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chioma. I think this is the first perspective, the first time I'm hearing the perspective from a gender point of view. And I think it's really resonates more than I could have even, conceptualized in my own mind, especially for Nigeria. This is really good. Thank you so much for sharing. I particularly noted the point around the misinformation and how this is gradually changing the narrative for what we do as civil society. And I agree with you. I've read, heard, and seen a lot on social media. A couple of days ago, I think even at the floor of one of the houses, I can't recall whether it's the Senate or it's the House of Assembly. It was brought up there that civil society, NGOs predominantly have big offices in the North. What are they doing? And, just riding on the back of this narrative of USAID funding Boko Haram. Thank you so much once again. Oyebisi, I'm coming to you. You have a huge platform of civil society in Nigeria, from the national-based, community-based, faith-based, and so on and so forth. It's been a total disruption to the work of your members. I would really like to hear from you. How do you see this disruption playing out, especially around the environment in which your member works? How does this fund cut or suspension affect civic space, the operations of your members? And of course, how also does it affect the trust between your members and the community that it serves, the partnerships? What can you say about that, Oyebisi, very quickly? 3 minutes. I think Oyebisi dropped off. So John, let me move to you before Oyebisi gets back on the call. You were at a meeting yesterday and you were having a regional conversation on this. Can you say, from what you have heard from Chioma and John, is it the same? Are similar things playing out in other countries in West Africa? And how are they coping? What are the immediate impact of this decision among civil society within the region? What's your perspective on that?
Thank you, Mulara, and greetings to all colleagues on the line. So I will try not to regurgitate everything that we had heard yesterday, but I would like to establish a few facts that aid as we have known it is not going to be the same again. That's the fact. Even if the aid is returned, or USAID is returned with a different name or whatever, it will just barely be bare bones, nothing much. And the other fact is that, are we prepared for this, or were we prepared for this? The simple fact is, no. Civil society wasn't prepared for this. Governments were not prepared for this. As for the impact, it is cross-cutting. For most of the organizations, they've been impacted. Most of them had programs that were running, and all of a sudden it had to be stopped. Some of them have not been reinvested. They don't even know, the future of their relationships under those contracts. The other thing too is that most of the organizations that funded pre-finance or pre-funded projects or initiatives have had to really struggle, and some of them are even at the verge of closing down. I had heard from the Vine that one of the organizations that we know of has actually closed down because it has pre-financed in millions with the funding that were supposed to be for other projects, or just because of goodwill they had to continue funding or pre-finance. But at this point, they cannot even tell if they would be receiving that money back. So that impact has been cross-cutting. In terms of governments are struggling to plug the gaps that was created by this. Yes, for some of the critical areas, they are able to do that. But the question is, even if they are plugging the gaps, is it money that was sitting somewhere that they're using to plug the gaps? No, it's an emphatic no. So it means that debt is going to rise. It also means that they are going to squeeze from other parts of the economy to be able to fund different sectors. The other thing that I really want to emphasize is the conversation around the impact of aid. And if you look at the conversations for the past several weeks, there have been two conversations. One at the United States level that kind of emphasizes how the aid has impacted individual beneficiaries at their end, but also how it is impacting U.S. global influence, or the potential to win U.S. global influence. If you come to our part of the continent, or let's say civil society, governments, low-income countries, the conversation has largely been around the ills of aid dependency, but also some of the failures of the projects that were funded by USAID and other US government initiatives. But the thing is that we have to be able to merge these two conversations. Until we merge these two conversations and think about what next to do, we are not able to really get back to the table when things resume. It's important that we begin to collaborate. Like yesterday, one of our panelists, the global director of programs for Oxfam, he had mentioned that at this particular point, individual NGOs are scrambling to, secure their homes, secure their finances, and all that. But it's important that we all work at securing, our collective base to ensure that that is strengthened rather than, the structure itself. The base is important to be strengthened, and we can only do that by collaborating. Civil society has to talk more together than having to work individually, because it's only by that way that we can come together and have or demand a chair when the tables resume. So yes, so that's that. I will leave it here for now. I probably would have more perspectives to add on the discussions yesterday. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, John. And I think I completely agree with you. We were on that call together yesterday, and like you alluded to, Ghana came forward, I think last week. The president of Ghana had instructed the finance minister to find a way to fill the gap that the US aid had created since the pause, and it was about $150 million. And the question we were asking ourselves here is, where was that money sitting before? Where is the finance minister going to get it? I haven't seen any note of that nature from the Nigeria government, and many governments in West Africa actually are perhaps not speaking openly. They may be speaking within and among themselves, but we are here to hear what they are saying and also have the figures beyond what we have on papers. Thank you so much for that perspective. Oyebisi, I can see you're back. Sorry, perhaps we lost you due to internet challenges. The question to you was, with these 8 pause, considering the network that you represent, the number of civil society, within your network, what does this aid freeze means to their operations? And by operations, we mean their core operations within their organization and the constituency they represent, and at the same time, the operations of the environment in which they operate. That's a bit tautological, but then I'm sure you get what I mean. In terms of civic space, what does this sudden eight court mean for civil society space in terms of its openness, its progressiveness? I do understand that one major area of support from USAID is in, strengthening the civic space, democracy, and all those related other issues. What does this mean to our already threatened civic space and then the operations of your civil society, your network members? OABC, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much, Omalara, and thanks for doing this with us. Thanks to all the speakers that have spoken. The challenges, we'd already anticipated that this information that we're seeing already have heightened interest by regulators and, maybe also the National Assembly in, regulating the sector. We've had, as at yesterday, the setting up a committee to look at the activities of NGOs in the northeastern and northwestern part of the country. Again, that is expected. We've also heard a lot of disinformation around non-profits parking jets in Borno and in Yobe, and question what exactly are they doing there. So you begin to then say to yourself, apart from the freeze, the narrative, the mis and disinformation coming out of both the US itself and also some of the structures already set up by Trump to help in reforming or reviewing USAID, they're already having a backlash. Of course, you would remember that, the Senate also, they've decided to investigate that allegation of Boko Haram being funded by USAID, and they've called the NSA. Okay, within all of that are conversations around the role of nonprofits. Before we got here, there had been allegations by the Nigerian military as well that, nonprofits support terrorists. Of course, that narrative is not true, especially when you link it to the principle of neutrality and the role of medical care in insurgency or in counterterrorism. So what you found is that medical or medically focused nonprofits would provide treatment, to whether they are terrorists or they are enemies or they are friends or they are foes. And this is part of the UN international humanitarian law process. So it's not that, they are supporting terrorists. But when you look at all of this narrative as a whole, then our sector is in for more closed space because it seems that not all should understand development, and that not all should understand our ways of working, do have that full understanding of what we do as nonprofits. And for example, in Borno at this time, you can't get into Borno without registering with the government. You can't do any work without submitting your work plan, which again we said is not the right thing to do. But I think it's now a good way for us to show how, as nonprofits, the work we do is even regulated. Okay. But the narrative that we're seeing needs now to be countered. And in terms of the impact of the foreign freeze of funding on the sector as a whole, let me provide information here that, as we do know, given the rigorous nature of the proposals that comes from the likes of USAID, not many NGOs are able to access this funding. So the sector is a bit protected when you look at the fact that many nonprofits only receive their funding support from from family and friends, especially the small and medium-sized ones. But a larger subset of the sector is protected from where I sit. The large nonprofits would be affected the most And we're already seeing those working field of accountability governance are being affected because the health conversation, education, and all of those are also there as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Oyebisi. I mean, I think it's pretty much, yeah, it's pretty much cross-cutting, listening to you and then comparing what you have said with what Chioma shared with us earlier. I think it's cascade. It has this, ripple effect from the bigger NGO to the smaller NGO, and the narrative around what is happening in the North and the new narrative that is being built, it's something that is very critical for our attention at a time like this. But let me go back to John very quickly before I come to the floor, to engage some of our participants, some of the audience in the room. John, you mentioned that almost 40% of AIDS in Nigeria from USAID. I'm sorry if I didn't get that correctly, but I remember there was something around 40%. 40% of aid coming to Nigeria. Yes, I got it correctly. Do you think this sudden change or shift in US aid to Nigeria can force government from the federal to state to local government? Can it change anything at all? I mean, I just shared that Ghana is trying to change something. We haven't seen the effect of that email, of the memo. We just saw the memo. We don't know whether the money has been released from where. But do you see a similar situation playing out in Nigeria? How do you see the government across layers plugging into this gap? Is it even possible, considering the critical nature of the sector that you mentioned, that USAID has been supporting Nigeria on health, education, malaria, and all of that? Do you think government has an immediate alternative to provide? John.
Thank you very much. This is a very trying period for Nigeria as a country. So rather than us looking at how do we fill that gap, we have concentrated mainly on the very, will I say, unimportant issue. And that's part of what led me yesterday to write an article where I talked about complex issues, simple lies, because that's what is happening. The Senate, rather than call to ask the national, the Ministry of the Budget Ministry and the National Development Department Agency, Ministry of National Development, to say, what is your plan? No, they want to see whether you said it was funding Boko Haram. Remember that similar allegation was made against Action Against Hunger in 2019, and in 2018, UNICEF was said to be training terrorists. So for every time, we basically outsource the problem. We point at others as causing the problem. And then we take no responsibility for what needs to be done or what has to be done to solve the problem, even when people are in a position to take those responsibilities. So assuming that you said was funding terrorism, and we allowed them to fund terrorism since maybe it was established 1960, maybe since 1965 up till now. And suddenly, because Trump came to power and said, hey, stop it, we're not giving our tax money again to other countries. We are not, oh, they were even funding terrorism. So what do we do? So what will happen is that when we are going to miss the SDGs, we are not going to be able to meet the SDGs. And as usual, the poor, the poor at the bottom of the pyramid will suffer, while those who are in power and who have access to common posts will not feel what is happening. Besides, they build hospitals, they don't go to those hospitals. They build schools, they don't send their children to those schools. So they are not even, the services they are providing, they are not taking those services. So we haven't seen that. And that's part of the thing that bothers me. Why don't we just focus on ensuring that we are able to cover that gap? Government should be able by now be saying, okay, we've seen of this about 750 million USD that came into Nigeria in 2023. So that's almost $1 billion that came into Nigeria. Of course, when you take away cost of operational costs and the rest, assume 500 million that came into Nigeria to support these sectors. We are going to be able to meet up with, say, $300 million. We are going to be working with private sector to build new partnership to see whether we can meet extra amounts of this. The others will see whether there were waste and everything and discountenance for that. So that's the problem. We're not seeing it. And that's part of the challenge that we have now. Nobody who should be saying something about it is saying anything, especially from the government point of view about it. We are basically all interested in, oh, there's a conspiracy. Oh, these people were they funded Boko Haram. But so none of us, no Nigerian, ever contributed to Boko Haram. In fact, the Boko Haram, obviously, the people who were active in the field were all imported from America to come and do it. So apart from the resources being funded. So we take away the good that we have gotten from this agency, and we are now looking at, oh, they did this, or they were not even good, they were not even that. But that's not the main issue. The issue around how do we ensure that we close these gaps on HIV funding, on anti-malaria funding, on agriculture, on election is coming 2027. You can be sure from next year, you said EU and the rest will have some resources available for people to do some voter education, which INEC seem not to pay attention to again. So how do we do all of those things? Nobody is saying any of those things. How do we even deal with our citizens that will be out of work as a result of this? So the whole narrative is the global north is having all the conversations about next steps, about blocking the challenge, the issue, meeting up the challenges. But global south, especially Africa and West Africa, seem uninterested in of those issues for now. So that's the challenge that we are dealing with. Did I miss?
Yeah, thank you so much, John. I think your narrative kind of answered the question. I wanted to hear clearly if you think the federal, state, or local government can plug this gap. But from what you have said, they are not even looking at a gap. They are changing the narrative to benefit themselves, to make themselves feel good. So I think you did answer the question. So Nigeria at this moment is not thinking of how to close the gap that this aid freeze has created. They are rather building a different narrative to support their political views or repackage their political view. Thank you so much, John. I want to come back to Chioma. And Chioma, really, I align with all that you said in your first submission. But the question here is, this is critical. I mean, all the sectors are critical: health, education, and all of that. They are all critical sector that this aid has been supported. But looking at their impact on gender, on women, children, the most vulnerable, do you think there are immediate alternatives, funding, partners, donors? And I believe so many people on this call may be working in this, field, this specific sector of gender, LGBTQ and all of that. They would like to hear from you. What are the immediate measures that we can adapt, not only for resilience, but at least to navigate through these current challenges? Is there something that have been discussed in your closed group, or something that you as an expert in the field and one of the sector leaders can share with us? What are the immediate alternatives that we can plug into?
Thank you very much. And that's a really great question, because we can talk about the effects from now till tomorrow, but the main thing is, how do we move forward? The first thing I would say is that people need to document. And I think, we in Nigeria, we say that till the lion tells their side of the story, the hunter will always look brave. You cannot keep quiet and let disinformation or misinformation continue to fester. So the first thing is we need to document, we need to tell our stories. What is the work that you've done? The beneficiaries that you have from the projects that you've done, what are they saying about your project? So that it moves beyond, what civil society is saying, and it starts to come from citizens themselves. My life is better because this happened, or this intervention helped me, all of those types of things. Documentation is critical in that regard. The second chunk of documentation is reporting back to the ones who gave us these funds. I know that, globally, organizations, especially in the US, and organizations affected by this funding freeze have been putting together impact statements and sending them back to their funders. And it's critical to support the argument, not necessarily for all of the funds to be reinstated, but for America to have a grasp on the scale of need that they're creating by this, by this immediacy. So documentation across those two is critical. I think there's also a place for civil society to start talking to government, right? So, again, leaning on the sum that Mr. Unyuku mentioned, there's a funding gap right now. How are we then holding our governments to account? Because our governments have been, if we want to be really honest, largely asleep because civil society is plugging these gaps. And unfortunately, civil society is still the whipping boy. So how are we holding government to account to say, well, this funding is gone, step in for PEPFAR, step in for Marie Stopes, step in for education, step in for cash transfers. As a matter of fact, could you step in already on insecurity, right? So that's all of that for documentation. As far as resilience is concerned, I think we need to have more conversations with ourselves, right? If I have 100 naira and you have 100 naira and we're both supposed to do research, can one person's 100 naira do the research and then the other person's 100 naira cater to logistics or cater to admin costs, etc., as opposed to all of us still trying to achieve that research? And I think we should be honest about what we can achieve and what we can't, because this funding freeze is crazy. Right. So that's the second thing. How can we collaborate? I think it's also time for people to speak up and ask for help. And, as Nigerians, it's not something we're really, really used to, but I think people should speak up and ask for help. Who is your direct line? And by that, I mean, is there an organization you've collaborated with who is slightly bigger than you are? Have a conversation with the ED, have a conversation with someone in their finance department and say, guys, this is the hole I need to plug. Do you guys have any spare resources? And I'll give a personal story. In 2020, during COVID, TECA had some financial trouble. And I remember speaking to the executive director of EVA at the time. And I'm like, listen, do you guys have any work? Now, we're set up as a social enterprise. So we're registered as a company limited by guarantee. And EVA said, you know what, actually, we have this, we have that, we have that. We want to commission you guys to produce this and produce this and produce that. And the money that they gave us, tided us through till the next grant we were expecting came in. And so one of the things TECA now does is we look for smaller organizations run by women, and then they say to us, we want to do this project. And we're like, oh, we have this 1 million, we have this $2,000, we have this, in the same way that we were tided over, we're helping younger, organizations to just, stay in the game, as it were. So I would say that people need to ask for help, speak up, say, I'm trying to run this project. The only money I need now is 500K. I promise you, by the time you speak to one or two people, you will be able to find something that helps you keep going. The final thing I'm going to say is that there is need for much larger organizations to start thinking about sustainability for the sector, and not just sustainability from a funding perspective, but sustainability from a strategy perspective. So we at TECA have started thinking about, okay, beyond the US, whether we like it or not, there's a growing far-right movement that even preceded the US. In Europe, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, all of these countries have been cutting their funding in little bits. The reason why, we're all kind of running around now is because America sneezes and the world gets a headache or the world gets cancer, right? But a lot of European countries have been leaning more towards, we want to develop our own countries. We're tired of giving aid. It means that whether we like it or not, we need to have an honest discussion with ourselves about sustainability, about strategy. And we need to start thinking about how can we raise money. For instance, at TECA, we have programs that are unpaid, but last year we started thinking about how do we sell some of these products. There are organizations that now run printing presses, there are organizations that deliver data services, there are organizations that run research on the side to be able to fund some parts of their budget. How do we as civil society start to think about what is the extra that I can do? What is the little bit that my organization can do, even if it only pays for electricity? That's one cost less for a donor to put money towards. And so that's kind of where, that's kind of where we are. The final thing is I think we need to have conversations that just focus on our mental health. I mean, Omolara, you and I have had conversations about this issue, and I've told you how stressed I have been. And yes, we're affected by the US issue, but we also have other grants from other places, so we're not as affected. Some people have 4 projects and 3 are funded by the US. Of course you will struggle. I think there should be opportunities for EDs and founders to just sit down and vent and just talk through some of these issues, build some sort of mental resilience so that we can keep going, and we can even think about, like, in those types of meetings, strategies. So that's why, again, I must commend WAXI for putting this together, because this is a much needed conversation that other countries were having that we're only just starting to have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chioma. I think this is your feedback are definitely more than eye-openers for colleagues on the call who may be thinking of, which way to go amidst this uncertainties. And I personally hear you loud and clear. And for us as WAXI node, as some of the ideas that you have shared, we would see how to explore it, in collaborations with some of the organizations in Nigeria. I think it's really, really important. Thank you so much. I'm still looking out for comments, questions, but at this point, I want to go back to Oyebisi. Oyebisi, I understand that quite a number of civil society, especially in the West, have been putting together some advocacy messages, impact stories to share, exploring legal actions, against the United States, US aid, as it were, and all of that. I don't know if we have done anything like that in Nigeria, but here is the question. What role can advocacy of any sort play at this time? I mean, listening to Chioma, she was talking about the need for us to build resilience as a lecture, as a sector, the need for us to collaborate, the need for us to speak up. And speaking up is a critical, in fact, it's the start of advocacy, telling people this is where I am hurting. This is what I think could, alleviate my pain. But Oyebisi, what can advocacy do at this time? And advocacy to whom? What is the advocacy agenda? Is the advocacy for United States to, lift the freeze, or advocacy to whom, when, and how? What kind of advocacy should we as civil society be doing? Who should be our target stakeholder? Is it to government? Is it to ourselves? What is it? How can we lend our voices in a very strategic manner to create a change to help us navigate through these challenges? What are the advocacy? And if you can also touch on a kind of, what kind of diversification do you think we should be considering, especially because you, as Triple NGO, you have a huge base of NGOs in Nigeria. So what kind of advocacy and how can we diversify? Oyebisi, you have the next 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Amolara. You've given me a tough job in 3 minutes, but one is to mention that we shouldn't forget the contested nature of civil society. And that speaks to how both the dichotomy between large, small, and medium-sized nonprofits, where we believe we're isolated, all right, or insulated. But now the reality is that government funding, whether foreign or national, is not sustainable. That we must keep at the back of our mind. The other is to understand, and I do like how Chioma has phrased it, that it's not only USAID, CEDA, now Netherlands, Canada, they are all reducing foreign aid, and speaks to the conversation we have been having before now within the global community around the need for us to reform the aid architecture. But civil society organizations, we've not paid too much attention to that, and now is the time to pay attention to that. So if there's any advocacy at the global level, is for us to pay attention to financing for development conversations, but also how do we reform the aid architecture. The other bit I would like to quickly mention is, again, advocacy on how to incentivize individual giving. Recall that when I was talking, I did say that as a whole, our sector is protected because the engine room of the nonprofit sector in Nigeria and everywhere globally would be the small nonprofits. And how do they get their funding? Funding from friends, families, and their founders. So but we need to now incentivize individual giving by engaging in conversations that allows, when I give to a nonprofit, I can get some tax deduction. Okay. The other advocacy we need to focus on is how we provide an enabling environment for local philanthropy. Of course, philanthropy can't block the $40 billion or thereabout, but we must now find, again, laws and enabling environment that helps our local philanthropists to give and give more. Look at the likes and to give big gifts, like, what we had with Scott, who gave big gifts to nonprofits, and that helped to catalyze the sector. We must begin to look at that in terms of, again, policy and advocacy. That must start now. And that has to be led not only by networks like Nigerian Network of NGOs, but by large nonprofits, all right, who seem to be most affected at this time. And they must be at the driver's seat, right, along with both the whole of sector approach. I'm just trying to emphasize where we all need each other. And again, linking it to the mental health conversation, we can't continue to work in silos. This is a time that we all have to come together. None of us is insulated, all right? And we must see this as a challenge, both as an organization and also as a sector as a whole. The other bit is to start now talking about, again, how do we improve policy around skills-based volunteering? We all cannot attract the right set of talents into the sector, all right? Because we can't afford to pay the type of skills that we need for this type of skills that we need. So how do we, again, work with government to ensure that we have policies that helps us to improve skills-based volunteering so that I can, and the private sector, so that I can attract someone in a big corporate to come spend 1 hour, 2 hours with me to be able to do X, Y, Z that I may need to do. Private sector partnerships, we need to find ways of cultivating the private sector. We've left the private sector for too long, especially for those that we use the word the neoliberal, neocolonialism. Now is the time to come back and look at what exactly can we do together with the private sector. How do we make use of private sector resources in ways that helps us to advance our vision and mission? The other bit is the conversation that needs to happen on public sector funding for services. And Choma alluded to that. The gaps that we're seeing at this time. For example, the Minister of Health, I was reading, he said that, okay, the 28,000, I think, medical personnel that are affected by this USAID freeze, government would absorb them. I did also read somewhere where it was saying that government is providing some level of funding for HIV. Of course, those bits have been blocked. But how do we, again, sit down with government, ensure that critical services that will be affected by this funding freeze and the aid cuts that we are seeing from other multilaterals, is being, solved by making budgetary allocations, releasing that money. And along that value chain, understand that nonprofits are also helping to deliver. So how would government provide those support to civil society organizations within that value chain? The other bit is to quickly mention that whatever conversation we're having now is not that the American government is giving us free money. It's part of their commitment since 1975. That official development assistance has been promised by multilaterals and was renewed during the MDGs era and now again during the SDGs era. But what we're seeing with that 0.7% of gross national income that has been promised is that many countries, all right, are now reducing that and channeling it either through support for army in the case of Canada, or the Netherlands that I've just said that will now use our foreign aid to ensure Netherlands first, okay? Then America is saying America first. Sweden already cut theirs. Denmark already did the same. So it's not a good time for the sector as a whole, especially those that depend on multilateral funding. Okay, but now is the time to again strategize, but have a whole of sector approach. One other thing I would mention, the advocacy, is that now we must not talk about reserves. There has to be an enabling environment for 6 months to 1 year reserves that we need to keep as non-profits. Whether a donor is giving money or an individual is giving money, there has to be reserves. And we must not talk about the true cost of running a non-profit. Over to you, Molara.
Thank you so much, Oyebisi. I think we have a bit of advocacy direction now, which I think we can all work together. You talked around philanthropy, private sector partnerships, and reserves, which you just talked about. Before I come to John, to give us more perspective from the regional conversation, I have my executive director on the call, Dr. Nana Afajino. Nana, I saw you, I messaged you. If you can say something. I know we've had a series of conversation in-house about this. And one of the thing you normally say about Nigeria is if Nigeria gets it right, all of us will sit up. You know, you alluded over the years to Nigeria's leadership on the continent. Nana, if you are...
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Omolara. This one puts me on the spot.
Sorry.
But no problem. I mean, I think I'm really happy to hear what Chioma and Oyebisi have said. I just was able to join at this time. I think what happened with USAID is something that should wake all of us up. I think we've been sleeping in our sector. We've become very comfortable. We've become so dependent on external donor funding. And as if this is going to continue for the rest of, for as long as the world is here. And I think for us as Africans, if nothing at all, this is the time that we really need to look for other ways, alternative ways of funding and resourcing the work that we do. Because what we do is critical to the sustainable development of our countries. But for a long time, our governments have not funded our work. A lot of the USAID, and for many people who have heard me speak, have been saying that our countries, the taxes and things that people pay, we should be happy. Why don't we have Nigeria aid? Why don't we have Ghana aid that is able to support, the work that is done to support the development of the country? Why are we not looking at having the kind of structures? So much funding comes through remittances from the diaspora. And there are people in the diaspora who are ready to support in the development of our countries. But there's no structure, there's no incentive that, our government put in place to support them. And we ourselves, and I'm so happy that Chioma talked about how do we work together, in a cost-effective way. How do we share resources? We have become, over the years, and the funding and competing for funding has contributed to this unhealthy competition between us, that you are the one whose logo might be seen, our egos, we work in silos, we don't work together. How do we break those things so that we find ways of working together that benefits all of us? So if we have resources to share, knowledge to share, ways to do things where we can then cut costs and be able to also share resources, that is something that we should be looking at more and more. But unfortunately, we have become, we have grown into these organizations that want to work on alone and be seen alone and be visible alone, because that is how you get the funding. Well, I mean, the funding is not going to be coming as we thought that it would. So we need to rework the way we work and rethink and strategize. And we have to do it together. We have to build solidarity. Look, civil society did not start existing in the 90s when we were getting them. We've had civil society in our countries for many years. How were they working? How were they resourcing and supporting each other? We will need resources. As for money, we need it. And we need other resources as well. But the way we get it, we have to realize that this era of aid, quote unquote, is over. Literally, we are getting into a post-aid world. How are we going to make sure that the people who, we are working to support the well-being and the development of our own people, including ourselves, is not something that, as we have it now, is in serious jeopardy. So it means that we have to re-strategize, we have to rethink, we have to look at the way we work together. And the points that OABC made about skilled volunteers is also another in working with the private sector. There's so much that the private sector has a vested interest in making sure that our countries develop, because that is when they would get the kind of profits that they want to get. But over the years, we've been unable to break this barrier, in relating with the private. There are few of us, our organizations, that have done it, but there are very few. So even the way we think, the narrative, around the way we work with private sector must change, and the way we engage our private sector colleagues must change, because they also have an interest in making sure that we have a vibrant civil society sector. So there are so many dimensions to this, and I'm so glad we are having this conversation. Nigeria, for me, and Lara, I'm glad you said it. I've continuously said, if Nigeria works, Africa will work. If Nigeria works, our continent will work. And so for me, there's a lot that, we need to do to make sure that Nigeria works and is a success. So this, I'd like to say this, I could talk forever on this subject of sustainability, but that's definitely one of the things that we have to really wake up to and ensure that we put the effort that is needed in changing the way things are. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nana. Thank you so much. I think one of the mantras that I took away from our original conversation yesterday is Africa first. When are we going to have Africa first? And I was listening to, I saw a clip of Dr. Ngozi Weala yesterday, which I posted on my Facebook. And she was talking about the conversation they have just had at the African Union during the transition, the leadership transition that just took place. And it's very clear. And she made it was an open statement when she was speaking to the media that aid, as we have always had it, would never come back. And I think USAID have just, triggered that for us to, to become more aware of this fact. And she was also talking about the need for us to begin to attract, our foreign investment in a way that benefits us. And this, I think, Nana, your submission also reminds me of a scholar I've always known for a couple of years, Dambisa Moyo. She wrote about dead aid. And I think wherever she sits now, just like one of the speakers yesterday was almost gloating, like, I told you guys, she's been a proponent for social innovation, civil society, social enterprises, and all of that. And just like Dambisa had always been talking about how aid has been, should be restructured, in a way that Africa can benefit more. But let's leave all that for another conversation. John, the question I want to ask you is, what are the alternatives that you're hearing from the regional perspective, how can we as civil society not only raise public awareness, but what should we be raising? What are the things that could change the game for us amidst this, current challenges and uncertainties that we found ourselves? And then I'll go to the floor. I can see Crystal, I see your hand. Please hold it on for the next 3 minutes. I'm coming right to you. John, you have the floor.
Thank you, Omolara. I think that I will just start off by quoting Nana, if Nigeria works, the rest would work. Thank you, Nana, for that powerful statement. I think that from all the conversations that we are seeing, one of the things that we are not hearing or we are not really seeing is African governments coming up with a strategy. It looks like we are all just reacting to the event and then just coming up with quid pro quo stuff like what the government of Ghana just did, like to plug in the about 150,000 gap. Nigeria did the same. I know that Nigeria has approved just about 200 million, which pales in comparison to what USAID gives, about 800 a year. So that would be a lot difficult. What we expect to see African governments do is to have a strategy and also begin to put their countries first. And I think that, yes, like our ED, Dr. Afajimi said, Nigeria should be the one taking the lead in some of these things, given the international clout that it has. Some of the areas that we really need to improve our advocacy on is in the area of plugging the corruption issue. If you look at the data, it's really sad. The continent itself loses about $150 billion every year on just corruption. Illicit financial flows, 60 billion every year. Put that together. That's over 200 billion every year, just on waste, just on corruption. And then we go back to these international organizations or bilateral partners asking for aid. No. I think that we have to begin to close those gaps. And that is where we can advance our advocacy as civil society. I think one of the areas that we can also look at is the issue of diversifying our internal generated funds. Most of us, or most organizations, and most countries are just focused on particular areas and not really looking at other areas. We need to begin to expand that. And even with civil society organizations, we have alternative funding models. We have alternative areas of resource mobilization that we can begin to think about. We've mentioned the social enterprises. We've mentioned the consultancies and all that. There are many that if we really want to, capitalize on and build our reserves, we should be able to do that. It is not something that is easy because we are used to big donor funds. It's something that we have to be very intentional about. Otherwise, we'll not be able to achieve anything. The other point that I really want to add as well is better resource governance. Yesterday, we heard about how resources fund, the big donors, or let's say the global north. And it was said that about 150 trillion has been extracted from the continent since 1960. That is more than 3 times the total GDPs of the big economies of the world, United States and China. And if this is the truth, I mean, it's a fact, why can't we have equal negotiating terms? Why can't we have an equal relationship where we both benefit as countries? So I think that it's one area that we really need to look at. There's a lot of waste that is also in resource governance, a lot of leakages in our resource governance that we need to really plug. And it's something that organizations, the civil society organizations should also join the advocacy on. We've noted that a lot of civil society organizations are focused on democracy and governance, but not really into resource governance per se. I think it's it's an area that we need to strengthen our advocacy on. The last, but not the least, that I really want to emphasize is that there is one part of the conversation that we are really missing, and that is the conversation around civil society, our relationship with multilateral organizations like the UN system, World Food Program, the World Bank, and all those kind of organizations. Let's know for a fact that most of these organizations are, supported by big donors like the United States. And for many years, some of them have worked in perpetuating, especially those around economic stuff like the World Bank. They've been accused of perpetuating the policy, policy agendas of these organizations. These bilateral donors. I think that with this new aid architecture, there is a fear that they can have a stranglehold on these international institutions. So imagine the United States having with this naked America First policy, having a stranglehold on the World Bank, having a stranglehold on the UN, having a stranglehold on other multilateral institutions. There is a great fear that they probably would push policy agendas of these big donors. And as you know, most of our governments don't have that policy autonomy. So they probably would just take anything that is pushed to them. And if we don't take time, they will have counterproductive effects. So it's time for civil society to also push against these governments having a stranglehold on these multilateral institutions, because they're also our institutions, and we have to have our voices heard at that too.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at the time, and I think you've raised some of the points that resonate with what Nana and Chioma raised previously. But most importantly, is for us paying attention to the agendas of the multilaterals. I see some comments, and I would like to take a few of them. This is from Elizabeth, and she says, we have the resources in Africa to solve our problems. Let us hold our leaders accountable first. The West will not continue to support us, and the monies are not utilized as it should. Accountability should be taken seriously, and corruption should be minimal. I completely agree with you. Let me come to Crystal before I come back to the speakers. Crystal, I saw your hand. You have 1 minute. Can you unmute yourself, and let's have your comments, contributions, or questions.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Crystal. I am the Executive Director of Center for Family Health Initiative, Nigeria. We are also part of the NGOs that were slightly affected because 1 or 2 of our grants are US-funded grants. Now, I totally agree with all the previous speakers. I will not, dive into what they have said. Both Mr. John and Chioma, they have really pointed out a lot of things. We need to focus on the right thing that is currently at hand. The situation really calls into question the very fabric of our development ecosystem, all right? We must recognize that while the situation is there, it's also an opportunity for self-reliance and resilience. Therefore, I will ride on what Chioma said in terms of coming together, pulling resources together. We will have to do that deliberately. CSOs have to, indicate interest on how to work together to, pass through this phase and make sure that the people we are serving remain healthy and strong. Now, let me go straight to the advocacy path. So many contributions have been said, in as much as my network did not allow me to hear everything John said, within this last few minutes. But I want us to really see how we can come together and hold government accountable for development commitments. We are talking about transparently allocated funds. Funds should be transparently allocated, not just that used to fulfill critical gaps. budget tracking. Every year budgets are rolled out. Now, let me come to Nigeria. We have large chunk of budget. Majority of it is borrowed. But at the end of the day, implementation. I keep on saying this as an executive director. We have come up with several policies. We have different technical working groups. Implementation is the problem. We can't go into meetings and keep coming up with things that are not implemented. So let's come together and see how we can track our budgets. Follow it up from beginning to the end. Every allocated amount to be accounted for. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Thank you for that insightful contribution. Let me take Edem. Edem, you have 1 minute. Questions, comments, or contributions very quickly.
Thank you, Molara. Well, for me, my concept is that we will survive.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned. But I think that the challenge I will throw to Waxi and others is that we need to be talking with others in the room. I think we are very used to talking. CSOs would talk, like yesterday, the government, the lawmakers talk. Then now we are talking. But I think we need everyone in the room. We need a kind of dialogues where we have the government, the private sector, the CSOs, even within the CSOs, all the different categories of CSOs. For example, here we are, I think we are probably having only maybe what we normally call traditional NGOs here, but who are not even able to build a school. But where are the churches? Where are the who can build school, hospitals, etc. So we need everyone in the room. And when we are talking also, I think we need to, on the regulatory side, we need to take a look at, it's not just about tinkering the existing laws, like maybe in the case of Nigeria, Companies and Allied Matters Act, tinkering with the clauses, we need that, but we need to take a strategic view of the kind of structures that we have. Are there such structures that provide us with the vehicles that we need to be able to do what we need to do to be able to generate income? For example, in UK now, there are about 8 different structures. But here we only have limited by guarantee. In fact, I will not even mention incorporated trustees because for me, that is not the real thing, But in UK now, even the cooperative society, you have 3 types now. You have the community benefit society, the public benefit, the traditional cooperative. So we need to also have that conversation. And that's why it's important when we talk about this to even have the government side, the lawmakers in the room, because we may have the bright ideas, but for example, if we need a new legislation, it's not us. We are not the one that is going to be able to sponsor and get that bill through. Thirdly, and finally, we need to, some of us that have been so used to the professionalization of the CSOs, maybe we need to begin to learn or unlearn and do things in simple ways. I don't need to go through certain processes to pick a guy up that is just falling in front of me. But sometimes we've been professionalized to begin to, someone is there, you can just simply pick him up. But, you need to go through the process of developing a concept node and looking for. So I think we need to simplify the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edem. I think you took the professionalization of the sector out of my my concluding remarks, and I love the way you have put it quite succinctly. I know a couple of years ago, we started the Ghana Beyond Aid idea. It took off so well. Honestly, I don't know what became of it. I can't say. I know Nigeria never started Nigeria Beyond Aid, and I noted that as one thing that I wanted to raise when Nana was talking about where is Nigeria Aid? Nigeria is not Beyond Aid, so there's no Nigeria Aid. But these are some of the structures that Ghana as a country, kind of factor in its drive towards achieving the SDGs. And I think it was John that raised the question of SDG. This is the first time even for me, as a professional in the sector, connecting this whole thing to SDG and the impossibility of it. It's a fact. Nobody's achieving any, especially Africa and maybe the third world countries. I'm not seeing any one of us achieving the SDG in the next 5 years now. Oh no, that's not possible. I don't see that. And these are the critical questions that we need to begin to ask ourselves, because the sector that are heavily affected by these, not only USAID, and I think it was OEBC that raised it, even the EU, the Netherlands, I saw a report of the Netherlands yesterday saying they also want to put the Netherlands first. I mean, a lot of far-right decisions, conversation agenda is gaining more ground. And in our conversation yesterday, somebody talks about, why are we crying over other people's taxes? USAID is predominantly financed by the taxpayers of America. So is UK aid, FCDO, and the like. Where are the taxes of Ghanaians, of Nigerians, of Senegalese? What are we doing with those taxes? Who is, something like that. So I think these are critical points that I personally wanted to raise. But as we round up this conversation, I think, Edem, you've challenged us. And in our own thinking, we thought it was important to first create a platform for us to vent. I picked that word from Chioma. People need to speak up. How have you been affected? Where is hurting you? Is it your arm, your leg, your heart, whatever it is? Let people know that you are hurt. It's not a time for any one of us to gloat, whether you are on USAID funding, or you are on Makata, or you are on Ford, or Bill Gates. It's not a time. This pain is for everyone. There is a very popular mantra that says, until everybody is fine, we are all safe. And that's it. It could have been any one of us. Any one of us could have fallen victim of this very draconian and drastic, decisions without any awareness or pre-information. So it's a time for us to collectively own this pain and share it. And I think this is very important. But John, as we round up, I mean Senior John now, not Junior John. John, I want to come to you. We have raised question around sustainability. And Edem has even helped us to, further sharpen what kind of conversation we should be having. I think this is the first between and among ourselves to vent and talk about what are the potentials that we have within the sector. And of course, at some point, we will need to speak with others. The private sector is equally affected. The hotels, the airlines, some hotels, you go to them, they tell you we don't have space. USAID has booked it all. WF, whatever. I mean, all this big organization. And you're wondering, how can I put people, how can I invite civil society to a workshop and I'm paying 200,000 naira per night for a hotel? Because USAID and the likes are able to pay the same. Now they are coming back. They are cycling back to say, oh, we want to have a meeting with you. We can reconsider the rate. It means they are equally affected. The airlines are affected. So many private sectors, especially those within the hospitality, whose services are quite key to our own approach of delivery approaches, they are all affected. So we should be speaking with the private sector at some point. And I completely agree with you that the legislators, those who coin policies for, the legislative environment, we need to hear them. What are they saying? And I think another point I picked from your submission, Edem, is the fact that the opportunities, the agenda, the alternatives that we are thinking about, do we have an enabled legislative environment to anchor them? Social entrepreneurship, for example, social enterprise. I remember a couple of years in Ghana, we started a conversation around how civil society can delve into social enterprises and use the gains to drive their charitable goals. And we realized that the laws doesn't allow for that. You are either non-profit or you are non-profit. You can't do both because it raises question around taxations and all of that. I mean, these are critical conversation that we haven't even had. So we can begin to think of alternatives on the top of our head, but the actualization, the practicality of it would raise complex problems. Senior John Onyeku, I want to come to you. We have raised question of sustainability, resiliency, And also, how do you think? So I would like you to share with us sustainability should look like at a time like this, what resilience should look like at a time like this, and most importantly, how do you think we should redefine donor, and I mean bilateral and local civil society relationship going forward? And I think that will be your the last opportunity you have to speak here, so you can give your final remarks. John, you have the floor for the next 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for all the wonderful ideas so far. I think we are in a very, I like to use the very popular, even though not so popular, public policy term of we are dealing with a wicked problem. It's a very, very wicked problem. And except we sit back and really evaluate this, it's easy for us in the sector to throw up ideas, say things and the rest. But if you also look at it historically, because I don't think the level of where we are fully internalizing it. If you look at it historically, most of our campaigns, most of our advocacies have been funded by donors. So we are not used to starting and ending an advocacy process. So now we have to deal with it. This is our issue. So how do we deal with it? Even meetings like this, maybe if WASI didn't come through, maybe if some of the conversation that went behind the scenes didn't happen, maybe we won't have this conversation. So where are the local Nigerian NGOs? Where are they and what are they doing? That's an issue that we need to deal with. I think it will take time before we begin to really understand what is happening. It's like some of my colleagues still on USID project, some of them have now come to realize that, look, this is over. From the fallen, that it will be end of the project. And we've got into that. And some of them are getting letters and the rest and coming to the reality that it is happening. Same thing is happening here. We're talking about we do this, we do that, we do this, we do that. You know, it's good for us to throw those things around. But before you can deal with some of those things, there has to be some kind of anchoring. And you can't make any change. Most of the time, I've said this, I've been part of advocacies, I've supported advocacies and the rest. You can't make any change without a champion within governments. There's no one. The legislators are not sitting to push what we want to do. Nobody is anchoring all of these things. We can talk about it. We can write. I've written like 3 different articles on this issue. And the issues are simple. We need government to strengthen domestic funding. We need government to support us, whether it's the National Assembly or the Office of the Vice President, trying to anchor this, or Ministry of National Development and the rest, International Development, is it National Development? Yeah. Trying to anchor, how do we leverage partnerships between public and private sector to set up a mechanism to fund some of these things? But because CSOs are treated like, you people are shopping with funders. We don't need you, we don't need us. What do you want? So they are dealing with it like something now. And then we need to strengthen multilateral and bilateral technical assistance with other nations. This we cannot do as civil society. Yes, we need to, but we can't do it. We need somebody in government. Is there somebody in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? Is there somebody in national development or so who is anchoring this and calling us to the room and calling these other agencies and saying, look, there's a problem? Because we also create jobs in the sector. It's a problem. So what do we need to do? How do you help us? African Development Bank. And so we all sit down at the table and start talking about this and working out solutions. Nobody's talking about that. It's not us. It's not civil society doing that. It's government, somebody in government taking the lead and bringing us also to the table. If we invite all these people to a meeting, they won't come. Even if they come, they will be like, why are you calling us? Who asked you to talk to us? Because they will rather deal with government to government. And then we need to develop a localized development models that works for us. Strengthen state and local government capacity to execute some of these capacities and the rest. So first, we need someone. We need someone who will champion this process. Let's leave CAMA, let's leave CAC out of this, because some of those agencies don't even understand some of the issues that they should be dealing with. I don't know how many of us know that CSO should not be doing school mode, but we're doing it because they spent about 150 million setting up the process. And so we just have to pay. We shouldn't be. And they have said it in meetings that I was part of. And I'm asking people, did you hear him? What he said? So, but here we are. What needs to society? We need government to do those things. They need to do it. So let's not blame ourselves if it's not done that we didn't do it. Because for us, one, we talk about whole of sector approach. We've not been able to do whole of sector approach. We have this demarcation. Some people here, some people there, some people coming, some people going, some people confused, some people lack capacity, some people have capacity. Everybody's in some coon of whichever way it goes. But for every organization, every CEO should be talking about how do we diversify our funding. Choma talked about funding diversification. What do we do? There is lack of capacity. Some will still say, oh, we are non-profit. We are not supposed to make any money. No, you can make money. Non-profit means you don't share the money in terms of dividend to your directors or shareholders, which you don't have. So you can make money, try and see how can you make money. Can you brand something? Can you do something? There are a lot of ideas. So if you need to pay for some of those strategy sessions around it as a CEO, do it. You don't need to have all your team members. To just be you or you and your board having a strategy session with somebody who helps you think through this process if you want your organization to survive, because it's not going to be like before. Then we need to advocate for policy support in a very concrete way. And here, if you look around, we used to have Kati, and Kati is, I think it's hibernating for now, but maybe this is where Triple NG need to come in and say, okay, how do we engage in policy dialogue to increase, to push for increased local funding, alternative donor relationships? Because that's the support you can give to your members. That's something that you do. It's public good. Everybody benefits from it. Your members benefit from it, and we'll move on. We can't, if you can't get everybody in the room, you need to start something. And then we need to leverage technology. Just so we're thinking people should volunteer and the rest. So let's leverage technology. Let's do donor, local crowdfunding, impact reporting, and the rest, a whole lot of ideas. So that's how these things has to happen. And that's the only way we can begin to see different results. If we don't do some of these things, if government doesn't do this, because many times we blame ourselves for even things that government should be responsible for, because we are used to it. Oh, do your own now. No, government needs to drive it, whether it's the Startup Act or whatever. The vice president took off it, former vice president, and they have the Startup Bill, Startup Act, which is now done. The civil society, we are still always struggling with amend CAMA, don't amend CAMA, but we don't even need CAMA. We need to have a law, which we haven't ever agreed. We have to typically focus on non-profits, and that's where some of these other concerns about layers of coming. It can't come into CAMA. CAMA is purely a business thing. And there is few countries where you have this lumping of profit and non-profit law in the same piece of legislation. So there are a lot of conversations that needs to be had. And CSOs, we've gotten to a stage 2 where you need to pay for services. You don't have to, can't go to big hotels if you can't afford it. And then for service providers, because it affects them too, like you said, Omolara, we need to worry, I'm rushing it. We need to worry about diversifying their client base. Maybe, yeah, like you said, consider cutting costs and all of that, make it more reasonable. I don't see a country where somebody is earning minimum wage, let's say 70,000, which many people are not earning, and then you go to buy something and they tell you 70,000. That's very cheap. It's not cheap, for goodness sake. If that's the minimum wage, it means more than 90% of us couldn't afford it. But here, somebody will earn 300,000 and they will take a holiday of 5 million at the end of the year. So you ask, where is that coming from? And then we need to improve efficiency and cost effectiveness in those sectors, clearly, and then collaborate with local development initiatives to do some of those things. And CSOs overall, I know where I will stop there. I think it's a very good idea if we keep doing this.
John, yeah, this is why I said senior John. That was a whole lot, and I'm reading from of my said, John, this is a lot. A whole lot, and it tells that it's further, support the fact that we have the ideas within the sector. It's just where do we start from? How can we start? And having a resource like you with all these ideas means that we would be having another separate conversation where we can reprioritize some of these things and distill them further to see what the lowest hanging fruit and the start point should be. But thank you so much, John. I want to come back to you, Chairman. Chairman, some of the, and here you can give your last words and remarks as well as you answer this question. In our conversation yesterday, one of the points raised was it's going to be so, for lack of better words, disastrous if we as civil society fold our hands and wait for whatever decision will happen post 90 days. And in addition to that, colleagues were saying that we need to have an agenda before the 90 days, elapse. So what kind of agenda are we talking about? What kind of position? We should begin to, define a position, a response, to USAID when they come back. I think it's going to be in April now. So, Chairman, I don't know. What do you think? What kind of ideas can we put together? What kind of response? How can we change our relationship post this disruption? What should we be doing? And then you can give your final words. We have a few more minutes to go. Chairman, you have the floor. Just 2 minutes. Is Chioma still in the room? She had mentioned that she would leave early. Okay, I think she left. Oh, yeah, Bisi, can you take that, please?
Yes, you see, the issues are complex and they're not complex. And when I say complex, it's also the understanding that civil society needs to have. For some of us that deal with multi-stakeholder approach to issues, sometimes you are labeled as you are engaging with government too much. But now at this time, linking it back to what Oga John just said, we need a champion within. And also what Oga Idem said around us looking at how do we move the needle on some realities that needs to change. As an incorporated trustees, you cannot trade. If you register as limited by guarantee, then you can trade. So how do we have conversations with FIRS, for instance, and say, for us as incorporated trustees, we need to be able to trade. How do you create regulations that allows us to pay applicable taxes when we trade? And how do we make that simple? So that way we can, but most trade also has to be regulated so that not everybody will now start starting a non-profit when they should be starting for profit. These are conversations we need to sit down with regulators and hash out, and they are important for our sector. Of course, the other conversation is to quickly mention that Nigeria itself also has a technical aid corps where we provide support to African countries, giving them capacity, sending teachers, sending doctors across. So it's not that Nigeria doesn't also have its own aid, and we must be proud of that and raise those as well as what we are doing as Nigerians to other African countries in terms of our policy as Nigerians. But we must now, Oga John raised something very much important that, okay, how do we move from A to B without this funding that is coming? And this is where networks becomes very much important. Okay, because whether you like it or not, networks are able, especially if they've got the right structures, to move the needle on many of these conversations. So whether those affected, whether those not affected, how do we all come together and share resources? Okay, someone can buy your ticket to come to Abuja. Another person may buy your ticket, give you accommodation. We need to share resources and get all of these things done. I do think that we have a moment with the House Committee chairs on civil society, both at the Senate and also at the House of Representatives. I mean, I remember one of them telling me that, oh, ABC, you guys are not giving us any proposal to work on. So we need to engage the National Assembly, and this is a good time to do that. One, providing them information about our sector, how this may have affected us, and what role we think government should be taking. I'll give you a quick example. During COVID, when I noticed that NGOs were not included in the salary support that government was giving to the private sector, I wrote to the vice president. And, even though I didn't get a reply, I kept monitoring that platform, all right, to see whether NGOs have been added. 3 weeks thereafter, NGOs were added. Again, that is the power, the subtle work that networks can do, and how we need to start supporting them for them to be able to, find some level of advocacy. They serve as the advocacy umbrella that we can all run for us to get the voice and the word out and to do what is right. So this will be my, my closing thought, to say that the time is now for us to act, and we need to act now. We have an opportunity and a moment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Oyebisi. I think your thoughts quite aligned with Edem, John, and Chioma. Junior John, Wax's John, what are your final thoughts on this? Clearly, this is the start of this conversation. We can't end it here. We have been challenged by Edem, and I keep saying that because his point were quite valid. John, what are your final conversation on this, your final comments to this conversation?
Thanks, Lara. I think that we should have no illusions that we are going to rebuild this aid architecture. No.
Okay.
I think it's important for us to begin to position ourselves and see how we are going to work when it returns. Even when it returns, we know that it would be just bare bones. But even with the bare bones, or whatever aid architecture that comes, how prepared are we to engage around that? That we need a whole conversation on, to think about our own strategy and all that. I think the other point that I really want to emphasize is that we should care for our allies as well. If you look at the aid that we get, mostly, civil society organizations, it mostly comes from private foundations. In the midst of all this conversation, private foundations are silent, largely silent. So what is happening to them? Are they feeling that probably they would have some compliance issues with the new directives and all that? How is it also affecting them? We need to also know. They are our allies. Whatever is impacting us, we need to also know and understand what is also impacting them. I know that the fear is that some of them might be equipped to bandwagon with the new government directives. Is there any policy, is there any advocacy angles that we could be doing on our end as well in support of some of their policy goals as well? I think this is a conversation that we need to also have with them. So in as much as we are crying about ourselves, we should also care about our allies. We should connect with them, understand what is really happening, rather than sitting and waiting for them to connect with us to hear what our challenges are. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And I think time is no longer on our side. And as it's tradition for us at Waxy, we like to keep to time. But I hear what all the speakers have said, and thank you all for sharing those beautiful and instructive insight. We had conversation around the need to reform the aid architecture, to begin to look more into philanthropy, local philanthropy, public sector partnership cannot be overemphasized at a time like this. I think Oyebisi and Edem and Nana raised that point quite crystally. Enabling environment to produce reserves for us as civil society is important. Having to put Africa first, put Nigeria first, especially through coming up with a better and improved resource governance. Natural resource governance is very important. Also tapping into the power of volunteers and internship to continue the work that we do as a sector is also important. I think another point that was raised that I noted, which was from Chioma, is the need for us to continue talking, especially as civic leaders, talking to ourselves, sharing the pains and collaborating to alleviate each other's pains at a time like this. Leveraging partnership is quite key. Domestic financing is key, and we should also pay attention to our mental health. A lot more comments were made on how to build our resilience, and I thank Senior John for those comments. We're going to put this together in a very succinct, a report, share with everyone and the link. And I can assure you that we would be engaging with other sector leaders from the government side, the private sector. And as soon as we have, a green light from them, we would reconvene to hear how they hope to support the work that we do and also take on more responsibility of the gaps that this aid freeze from the United States has caused our development agenda as a nation and as a continent. On this note, I would like to thank OABC, our partner. This conversation is co-hosted by Triple NGO and WACC's office in Nigeria, which I currently lead for the institution. So OABC, thank you so much for partnering with us, for bringing your platform, your networks and partners, to be part of this conversation. And Mr. John Onyeku, thank you so much for also joining us. Chioma in absentia, thank you for joining us. Chioma sits on the board of WACC Node, and she's also the executive director of Tech Nigeria. And John is my colleague at the regional office of WACC, is the program officer for policy influence and advocacy. To all the colleagues that joined us for the call, this is not the end. We're going to be reaching out to you very soon, and let's keep practicing some of the ideas that we have heard on this call and holding on to ourselves and trying to find a way to continue what we know best to do. The aid can freeze, but our work cannot freeze. On this note, my name is Omolara. I work with WACC. Thank you so much for joining, and have a very good Friday and a restful weekend. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, John. Thank you, OABC.
Thank you,
colleagues.
Bye.
Thank you, Edem. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you.